work up my mind. And as a Buddhist committed to benefiting all sentient beings, I recognized that it would be wrong to talk about benefiting all sentient beings, but not take the climate crisis really seriously, because the suffering that comes out of that is enormous. And then about a year ago, I started to get involved with Extinction Rebellion. So I became an activist again. I hadn't been an activist since before Buddhism, when I was a far left activist, actually. And I've not stopped being a socialist. So there I am, I was involved in the action in London in October. And actually the first action was in our local town that I was involved in, was last February 2019. So for me, being a Buddhist and being a climate activist are really part of the same thing. And along the way, I came across the Deep Adaptation Forum, which was formed by a professor in Cumbria called Jem Bendell. And I recommend you to look up their website, Deep Adaptation Forum. And it was through that I really started coming to terms with this idea of collapse. I've been thinking about collapse ever since the 90s, at least, that society in general, globally, is somewhat beginning to disintegrate. But I suppose because Deep Adaptation Forum is so interconnected with the climate crisis and with what is fast becoming, I'm sorry to say, inevitable. It's not completely inevitable yet, but it's looking increasingly likely. So then thinking about collapse and thinking about how we survive collapse. When I say we, I'm talking about the human race in general. I'm not saying everybody, but how the human race and as many of the species as possible and as much of the environment as possible can survive collapse. So I think about collapse from many different angles, and I'll definitely talk about ecological collapse. But I want to start with war, because we are actually in a situation, unfortunately, where the conditions are ripe for a third world war. There are many parallels with this situation that prevailed before the First World War and also before the Second World War. And we also have a serious crisis with capitalism. And capitalism needs growth in order to survive. And it won't have escaped you that they're having a serious problem with growth because of the COVID crisis. And so they're sort of flailing about in some ways. There's talk about even collapse of big oil companies like Shell. So, I mean, these are the pillars of capitalism in some ways. So how does capitalism create growth? Well, in a situation like this, it's very difficult. But one tried and tested means, unfortunately, is war, because war destroys so much of the assets, and then it creates an opportunity to reinvest afterwards. And we saw that definitely with the Second World War, and we've seen it more recently with Iraq. So in a way, the precariousness of global politics is kind of connected with that as a serious possibility. And in terms of the situation with capitalism, the recession post-COVID-19 is well underway already. There are many millions of people out of work in the US, and there's been a prediction that the recession in the UK will be the worst for 300 years. So capitalism will struggle to survive, and the financial markets and those that support them, such as the government we have now and the governments that prevail through most of the world, will also fight for the survival of capitalism. The thought of war is something which we haven't had to confront a war, those of us living in this country, in our lifetimes, a world war. Our parents did, many of us, and stories from my parents, very distressing. But we do know quite a bit about war because we've witnessed what happened in Iraq and Syria and what's happening in Yemen and so forth. So there are many examples that we're aware of. And definitely social collapse is one of the byproducts of war. We can see that in Libya, for example, Somalia, and so forth. And also barbarism, where the most cruel, awful things happen, such as using rape as a weapon, which is something that is ongoing in Syria. It's been a major factor. And there's a terrible history of that from all different parts of the world. If it's a nuclear war, then there's even the threat of the nuclear winter, where the whole world gets encased in some kind of dark cloud. And war would escalate the climate crisis because it would create an incredible amount of carbon emissions. And it would also precipitate epidemics, famine, and so forth. Some of these things are going to happen through other causes anyway, and already happening. And it's important to say that when we talk about collapse, in a country like the UK, and we've got a couple of people from the States here, many of us have been kind of protected from collapse, but actually collapse has already happened in many parts of the world. It's not kind of news for people in many parts of the world. It's something where they can look at us and say, you're finally coming to wake up to what's actually going on internationally. So it is a wake-up call, and probably that's one of the reasons why we're here, why we're actually willing, as Rowena said, I think, to brave it and consider these issues this afternoon. The second kind of collapse is agricultural breakdown. If the climate escalates up to 5 degrees or above the current global average, then agriculture will only be possible in northern Russia, Canada, Scandinavia, and then 3 islands, namely Japan, New Zealand, and the British Isles. You wouldn't be able to grow food anywhere else. It'll become desertif. It'll become like desert in many parts of the world. And we can already see this process underway, I'm sorry to say. And the breakdown of agriculture is even something that we've been experiencing in the UK with these very hot summers and certain, not completely failed harvests, but relatively, breaking down. And then if the food chain collapses, then the economy collapses, and the economy might collapse through other causes anyway. It's a very fragile phenomenon, actually. It's being shored up through financialization, which means people investing in investment, and that it's not really, the economy isn't based on real things anymore. It's based on money, and it's based on finance. It's not really even based on money. It's just based on figures in computers, and so it's incredibly fragile, and it heats up. And if we look at Argentina in 2001, when the bank accounts were frozen, this led to riots. So imagine if you couldn't get any money, and therefore you didn't have the means to buy any food. And of course, maybe there wouldn't even be any food to buy if the food chain is broken down. So we've got used to being able to go to the supermarket and buy whatever we want from all over the world. But clearly that's unsustainable, given the way things seem to be heading. Political collapse, just as a descent into lawlessness and warlords, which is kind of almost tribalistic, such as in Libya and Afghanistan. And we might think, oh, that couldn't come to our country, we're all too nice or something. That's not completely true. Look at what happened in Bosnia in the 90s, where communities which had been so harmonious previously, due to certain circumstances, were separated and were willing to kill each other. Let's talk now about ecological collapse, which is well underway. There was a debate at the Oxford Union where Claire Farrell from Extinction Rebellion gave a talk. You can find it on the internet. She said, if you drop a cup and hope it won't hit the floor, you're bound to be disappointed. And she followed that up by saying, liberate yourself from hope. Hope is a difficult sort of emotion in a certain way, because hope can be disappointed. And it's fragile, because it's about a future which we want to see, but we can't really depend on. We can't depend on the future. Increasingly, we're living with more and more uncertainty collectively. And so hope's kind of risky in a way. She said, you should face your own mortality. And then she gave certain things which I'm sure we've heard of, but I'm going to repeat them. Watch the Arctic melt away. Probably within the next decade, it'll be gone. This will bring forward multiple feedback systems, such as releasing the methane in the tundra and so forth. The soil is dying. I saw a very powerful film a few weeks back. And even when I just go for walks around my village in Somerset, on the edge of fields, at first it looks like a beach, but then when you tread on it, it's not sand, it's like powder. And it's the result of all the chemical fertilizers that have been put into the fields. And the rain washes this kind of sediment to the corner or the edge of the field. And there's no insects in those fields. There's no wildlife whatsoever. There are crops growing there, free from pests, because those have been destroyed by chemicals. And this has happened everywhere, throughout our country and throughout the world, actually. Air pollution is killing millions. The oceans are acidifying and dying. And they're filled with plastic and polymer fibers. The sixth mass extinction is underway. Cristina Figueres said, at 1.5 degrees warmer than the baseline, which was set around the Industrial Revolution, there's no business continuity. She was previously at the UN as their climate change advisor, I think. There'll be no insurance industry. The super rich are already planning their escape. And there's a lack of political will to tackle it. We can see that with our own government. We've seen last year wildfires in the Arctic Circle, the Amazon, Australia. In our own country, we've seen floods, we've seen drought, and we've seen the displacement of millions of people globally, many of them living in refugee camps. So this is the collapse that is underway already. As I said, it's not totally inevitable, but it unfortunately is looking increasingly likely that it will become a global collapse. It's not absolutely too late to do something about it, but that needs an extraordinary political will, which at present seems to be lacking in the leadership of the biggest nations of the world, including our own, which isn't one of the biggest. Okay, so I'm going to leave it there and pass back to Rowena now to introduce the first practical exercise. Thank you very much.
Is that okay? Can you hear me? Right, so we're calling this exercise 7 generations into the future. So David's going to set it up so that we will all be in groups of 3. And we need to imagine that we are 7 generations into the future. 7 generations is about 200 years. Now, we might have different views about this, but for this exercise, we need to imagine there will be human beings alive at that time. So we'll be in groups of 3 of us together, 200 years into the future. And each person has a question to answer. So the 3 questions, so I don't know if you just want to jot them down, if you've got pen and paper, but they will be repeated as well, so don't worry if you haven't. So question 1, which will be for person 1, what have we come through? What have we come through? Question 2, for person number 2, how did we get to where we are now? How did we get to where we are now? And the 3rd question, what is it like now? What is it like now? So each person has 1 question to answer. So when you're in your groups, just work out who is number 1, number 2, and number 3, and then you'll know which question you need to answer. And you take it in turns to answer your question. And when one person is speaking, the other 2 just listen. So it's not an interactive, like a conversation, it's just one person speaking at a time, answering their question. And there'll be about 4 minutes, about 4 minutes each to speak, and then it's time to pass on to the next person. And David will give you a prompt when you need to move on. And then we'll all come back into the main group for feedback. So does that all make sense? Any questions about that? Any questions? Can you see David? I don't know.
I think we're all right. Yes.
All right. Okay. So can I hand over to you to sort people out into their groups?
Yes. Okay. So 4 minutes each in the breakout rooms. Here we go.
Sort of feedback or comments.
Do I just speak?
Oh,
Please.
yeah. Yes, Betsy, sorry.
I thought it was just an incredible exercise and very meaningful, but I wanted to just start with a practical thing. It would be really helpful if you all could give us like a minute to get organized, because I found that in almost every time I've been in breakout groups.
Okay.
It takes a little while to figure out who's going to be first and second and, you know, all that. And by the time we get that together, the last person doesn't have the full 4 minutes. So that's just a practical thing.
Thank you, Betsy. I'll take that advice on board. Yeah, Lisa.
And for me, I was first, and I felt I needed some time to kind of recover from what we'd listened to. You know, it was all stuff that we know, but it was a lot of information in a short period of time. And I felt quite emotional going in and then having to think, you know, it was, yeah, I just needed some time, I think, to reflect first and get balanced again.
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks. So we will take note of all these points.
Well, yes,
This is a new experiment, but thank you very much.
I also echo that. It was really hard hitting, to have such a eloquent list of what collapse will look like, that I felt railroaded into participating in the exercise, which was extremely useful. But yeah, I would have needed maybe have a bit of a body centering first, like,
Okay.
and then and acknowledge the feelings and what the body was feeling, and then move on to that. Thank you.
Thanks very much for that feedback,
Yeah,
Monica,
thanks.
and I'm sorry you felt railroaded. Yeah, we maybe tried to pack a lot into it, into the time, and but I'm definitely making notes. So thanks very much for all the feedback.
Yes, no, we really appreciate it. It's the first time we've done something like this, so it's very, very helpful having feedback in any form.
Could I make a possible request? I think we didn't realise there were actually 4 of us until a bit of the way through. So in the end, I didn't get to speak, which maybe wasn't that big a deal. But it was just, we didn't realise that Helen was with us as well as Colin at first. I don't know how that was with the screen, and then we altered something on the screen. So anyway, that was just something.
Sorry, Jenny, I should have mentioned it. Obviously, we don't have, the number isn't actually divisible by 3, so I should have mentioned, if you're in a 4, to make it 3 minutes each, because otherwise somebody misses out. But sorry about about.
Well, we'll go next time.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
I wonder if it might be an idea, just thinking about what we've said, because I agree with what Lisa said, that when we went into the rooms, you were still thinking about everything. And I just wonder if we've gone into the rooms, if we'd have had maybe a few minutes meditation on what we've just heard. But after thinking of the questions.
Yeah, we're going to do that now, but next time we'll do it the other way around. Thanks, Dee. Okay, so I'm going to hand over.
To me.
Yes. To
okay,
Andy,
so we're going to do a meditation now.
Minutes meditation. Yeah.
So if you could sit in such a way that you'll be able to just meditate. Make sure that your back is straight and your legs and bottom are arranged in a stable way. And just bring your mind with your body on this seat, at this place, at this moment in time. You're in a room somewhere, which is in a building, which is probably in a street, maybe in a village, town, or city, in a country of this planet, in the year 2020, with approximately almost 8 billion other humans and countless beings of other species. And we just recall that the Dalai Lama has said many times that outer disarmament begins with inner disarmament. And similarly, outer collapse results from inner collapse. So we need to build inner resilience in order to participate in developing outer resilience. So just feel yourself in your body, with your mind, maybe around your heart center. And recognize your deep potential for inner resilience. The foundation of which is ethics. a commitment to not harming others, and if possible, benefiting them. And feel the strength of your personal inner resilience, and recognize that all humans have this capacity. So from here, feel the interconnectedness, first of all with other humans of this planet, heart to heart. Feeling we're all in this together. None of us is actually separate. That's a delusion.
Thank you, Andy. Thank you, everyone. So we're going to take a short break now, just 5 minutes to stretch or get a cup of tea, whatever you need to do. It's now 2:55, so we'll be back at 3 o'clock, if that's okay. And we'll see you then. Thank you.
Adaptation, and it follows on from the first topic. And I want to start with the awareness that it's very difficult for us to believe that the supermarket shelves would ever be totally empty. And the reason is because we've had a lifetime of assuming that they will be pretty well stocked. Maybe the odd item is missing, but generally we expect them to have most of what we want. And that is something to do with our consciousness, that we are kind of mainly fixated on things carrying on the same as they are. But you can actually call this naive, I'm sorry to say, given all the data that we have about what's happening in the world. And so deep adaptation is about preparing ourselves now for the probable collapse that is, as I've said in the first part, already underway, and in many parts of the world quite well developed. So personally, I divide deep adaptation into 3 levels: outer, inner, and ultimate. And I'll see if I can say a little bit about each of them. But I'll probably say more about outer and inner, and maybe a little bit about the ultimate deep adaptation. But first of all, I just want to mention Professor Jem Bendell from the University of Cumbria, whose paper called Deep Adaptation is the most downloaded ever academic paper on the internet. And you can download it from the Deep Adaptation Forum that I mentioned earlier. And in it, he talks about three, but later he adds a fourth, processes that are needed for deep adaptation. And they all begin with R. Actually, they all begin with RE. So the first one is resilience. We need resilience, which I think most people understand what that means. It means the capacity to keep going, even when things are difficult. And the second one is relinquishment, which means we have to let go of quite a lot of things that we've got used to, but which we actually don't need. And as you know, our culture sort of prompts us to fill our homes and our lives with things that we don't actually need. And the third one is restoration, which means to bring back certain traditional things, perhaps low-tech things, things that didn't require a lot of apparatus and staff, but which actually sustained us well in the past. And the fourth one, which isn't actually developed in the paper, but which he adds later, is called reconciliation. And this one is more spiritual. And so it sort of leads on to the inner deep adaptation that I want to talk about. But in that, he mentions that for some people, reconciliation with God is actually part of their deep adaptation. And for others, he talks about love. But I mean, in a way, we're talking about the same territory. We're talking about finding some spiritual foundation in this fourth one, reconciliation. And we were into lockdown a little while, and I don't know what was going on in my mind, but suddenly one morning, while I was doing my meditation practice and supposed to be thinking about other things, into my mind came a manifesto for a carbon negative future. I think everybody can appreciate how important carbon negative would be. It means that instead of pumping out CO2 into the atmosphere, we actually have ways of reabsorbing it and reducing it. And my manifesto included quite a lot of measures that I thought we would need in order to achieve this. And they're pretty radical, but I'm going to go through them in order to give you some of the kind of thoughts which went through my mind and do go through my mind as the kind of things we need to do. And I'd really like it if we could do these things this year, but I don't think we're going to quite achieve that. And some of it was actually inspired by lockdown. So the first one is travel only by foot, bicycle, rowboat, etc., unless 100% essential for survival. Okay, so that doesn't mean you would never use a car or an aeroplane or something powered by other fuels, but you would only do that if it was 100% essential. So that actually reflected my way of life, mainly during lockdown, and I must admit, I think it's been great. So it's quite interesting. I'm not saying it's been great for everybody, and that would require a big transformation of cities and so forth. And there are other measures in my manifesto. The second is no livestock farming and no more chemical pesticides. The third one is widespread reforestation and rewilding. The fourth one, stop producing pharmaceuticals for profit. I actually, first of all, I put that as no more chemical pharmaceuticals. But when one of my sons saw that, he really went to town with me and said, "Look how many lives are saved by, by modern medicines. Surely you don't want all those people to die." And then I realized, well, that actually perhaps the main problem is that they're produced within the wrong kind of economic and academic context. So if we took out the profit motive, it might shift things quite a lot. My fifth one was that all public services should be under local democratic control. So we're moving now into things about the structure of society. And the sixth one is local participatory democracy. So this is very different from representative democracy. Instead of voting somebody in every few years and then leaving it to them to look after you, people are actually actively engaged from the bottom up in making decisions. So this is very influenced by XR, which I'm involved with, where there's a lot of emphasis now on community democracy. And since the last election, I must admit that I've personally lost any tolerance for the representative democracy processes we have. They're not democratic anymore because of the party machines, and well, they've been hijacked, haven't they? The seventh one, all other communication, organization and politics, etc., via the internet. So in other words, what I'm thinking of is that people would participate locally, but obviously you would need communication with other units. If you're in a city, you would live in a small community within that city, and you would need to communicate with other communities. But also, if you're not in a city, like I'm in a village right now, you'd need to communicate with other villages. So that, because I've cut out a lot of the travel, you'd need to communicate via the internet. And the eighth one, perhaps it's the most important, is that the driver for the economy should be well-being rather than growth. So it's not that there would never be any growth, but that growth would not be the reason or the purpose of the economy. So those are they're just my ideas. And of course, I'm not saying that it has to be that way. I'm not trying to do something top down. I actually encourage everybody to think for themselves, what would you like to see? Which is kind of what we were doing in the previous exercise. How to achieve it? So the first one that I put there was allow capitalism to collapse, because no growth removes its reason for being. And of course, we'd have to resist the drive to war, which I'm sure is, well, it's already happening, isn't it, in the standoffs between America and China, and now more recently between China and India. You know, they're kind of rattling their sabers right now. So you'd have to resist that, allow it to collapse, and meanwhile create local, sustainable, cooperative community organizations. And the basis of that, actually, during the COVID crisis, a lot of communities, including my own village, but also my son in Bristol, his street, for instance, they've created these incredible support systems, which don't have to just stop when lockdown stops. The basis is already there in the community. And then the third one was grow food organically everywhere, including cities. There are many, many projects for growing food in cities. And if everybody grew food locally, then we would cut out the need for this sort of supply chain distance. And my fourth one lists a whole lot of things which I would just hope would be stopped. Armaments, military. Doesn't mean you wouldn't have something like a military force, but it would be used to save lives instead of take them. Borders, I'd do away with borders. Economic competition. If the driver is well-being, then the driver is not to outsmart another organization. Advertising. The fashion industry. So you can add more and more things which are actually harmful and we don't really need. So that is that's my manifesto for outer deep adaptation. What about inner deep adaptation? This is more like how everybody looks after themselves individually. Everybody needs physical health, a good diet, good sleep, good exercise. We need to learn to let go of unnecessary material acquisition and dependence on unsustainable lifestyles. We need to develop together low carbon, eco-sustainable cultures. And internally, we need to cultivate love. For some of us, religious faith, although that's not for everybody. Spiritual practice, again, it might not be for everybody. And of course, it can take many forms. So it's a very general term. Finally, my ultimate deep adaptation is to really recognize that things change moment to moment, and that while things seem to exist independently of each other, they don't. Everything depends on other things. And because everything depends on other things, nothing actually exists by itself, including me, including the place I am, including even the notion of what time it is or where we are. These are all dependent, and they are subject to our mind to construct them. And these kind of realizations of momentary impermanence and the lack of independent existence can lead our consciousness beyond notions of life and death. And we can go beyond the fear of extinction. We can go beyond this division into war and peace. We can go beyond selfish ego protection. And then within ourselves, we can find universal, unconditional compassion and responsibility, while staying realistic to what is happening and staying grounded in the immediate situation. We're never going to solve anything in the future. We're only going to solve things in the present, with an eye to the future and with an understanding of what got us here from the past. But we need to be grounded in the present, at this place, and from there, with wisdom and with a sense of universal responsibility, that ultimate deep adaptation will stand us in good stead, give us the resilience and so forth talked about earlier. Okay, thank you.
Thanks very much, Andy. So we're going to do another exercise now. And in a moment, we're going to go for a walk. So you may have different situations there. Some of you may not be able to walk outside. We don't know. If you are, then that's great. If you're able to have a walk into nature somewhere quiet, or you would go your garden, maybe a good situation. And the idea is we're going to take a walk into the future. So as you walk, imagine that each step is taking you, maybe a few months further into that future. We're looking at maybe the next 50 to 100 years. It's up to you a little bit if you can see what feels right for you. But it'll be for 10 minutes. And just slowly walking and meditatively and allowing the visualization of the future as you feel that it will be. And it may be very difficult, may be very challenging, or there may be lots of good things. There may be a mixture of both. Each person will experience it differently. And then at the end of that 10 minutes, when you come back to the screen, you'll be in a breakout room with one other person. And so you're just going to each take about 7 minutes to talk to each other about what you saw, what you experienced, what you visualized, that as you walked through into that future. Okay, is that all quite clear? Is everyone okay with that? Yeah, and you've all got somewhere you can all walk. Great, okay. So I'm going to put you into breakout rooms in twos in a moment and come back in 10 minutes. So it's now 3:20. So if you come back at 3:30, and you'll be in a breakout room when you come back. See you then. Hello everyone, welcome back. So yeah, and a couple of people didn't manage to get into the breakout room, so I'm sorry about that. That's just the technology not completely working, I think. So sorry if you've been on your own for a while.
David, Helen said she has difficulties coming back into the main room when she did it last time. She doesn't seem to have reappeared even though she clicked the blue button.
Okay. Yeah, I know, here she's back again. Okay. So we have a few minutes for feedback, and I'm just to say, very grateful for the feedback on the first exercise about things that we could improve. If you have feedback like that, please put it in the chat, and then we can use this time, together to reflect on the content of the process a bit more. Okay, so by all means, welcome to comment on how the process was run, because we really do want to learn. But these few minutes, it would be really good to hear about what came out of the exercise for you, what insights or new thoughts, or how was it to hear from the other person? Anybody like to, anybody like to start?
Jenny's got her hand up.
Okay. Yes. Do you want to unmute yourself, Jenny?
That felt like it was a lot more positive compared to the first exercise, because I guess that the first exercise was really looking at the scenario in a sense of everything that was going wrong. And I felt that this exercise was thinking more, I think particularly I was struck by the things about the adaptation, resilience, relinquishment, restoration, reconciliation. So I felt that this exercise was more thinking perhaps in terms of what we could do, and also, well, just thinking about the positivity that's arisen from some of the COVID-19 groups, and how, different groups have got together and sort of, been more supportive. And it felt more like sort of taking ownership, I think. Anyway, that'll do as a start to kick off with.
Thanks very much.
Yeah.
Someone else?
Kate's got her hand up.
Oh, okay, right. Yeah, go ahead, Kate.
Yeah, it was as Jenny was describing. There was the first few steps, about doing something and having agency over what happens next. And then it was quite a funny step when I had to step into the fact that I'm not around anymore.
Right.
There's no way that I'm going to be around for 50 years. And so I was stepping into my own demise and leaving it all and having to drop it all as me, not knowing what that means, absolutely not knowing. So that took a pause. Mm-hmm. And then it was over to my kids and their friends, and so really feeling my way into what they were inheriting, and it did make me think about what they were inheriting from me and the importance of what I do now in relation to them, because they are inheriting the task of being humans in a difficult situation. So the inner resilience that I can give them, it's, I sort of woke up to the importance of that as I let myself go. It's like handing the baton. And then I got to my grandkids, and well, all sorts of stuff went on, but yeah, that was quite an interesting journey.
Are they already here? Do they exist?
No, my kids are in 20s and teens, so not yet.
Okay, yeah. So I'm sorry we don't have a lot of time, but we've got time for a couple more quick sharings. Who wants to say anything? Yes, Betsy.
I found thinking about the next 50 years, walking into the future for 50 years, I won't be here either, but just the concept of where we will be in 50 years, very sobering and very destabilizing personally, emotionally, because for 200 years, I could imagine we would go through everything and we could come out the other end and we could be reformed in some kind of way in small groups or communities around the world or whatever. But these next 20, 30 years, 50 years, I think are going to be the biggest change. And I am getting the impression that the change is going to happen faster than we thought, because everything's going faster than we thought. And I think when the economy falls, when the economy crashes, which I think is on the horizon, when oil companies go bankrupt, which I think is on the horizon, that's radical. That's very hard. I mean, will we even have an internet in 50 years? So that was very sobering for me.
Thank you. Okay, so thank you very much. So we don't have more time for the feedback, but we will finish with this section with another meditation. So yeah, give me a second. So moment. So once again, just settle into a comfortable position, preferably with the back fairly straight and vertical. Take a moment to let your body relax. Bring your attention inside your body. Notice what's going on. And so there may be a lot of energy buzzing around in there. Just take a moment to allow that to slow down. Just breathing gently and naturally. And listening to what's happening within your body. Being aware of your breathing. And as the energies in your body settle, hopefully your thoughts begin to quieten down, slow down. And be aware of your still center, which is always there. Sense of stillness, silence, and space. And within that space, you might notice that you are not on your own. You are connected with the outside environment. Be aware of the life that is moving around you. And also be aware that you are connected with everyone else on this Zoom call. Not only connected electronically by the internet, but connected by a common thought and intention. And if you listen carefully, you might sense the presence of all those others that are with us here now. And you also might sense the presence of many, many other similar groups, people who are tuned in to the same thoughts, same concerns, same wishes, same intention, recognizing the challenges that we're facing, the need to act. You might already be aware, you might be becoming aware that that interaction, that global connection seems to be intensifying right now. Something is happening, and this pandemic situation seems to have served as a catalyst for this connection to be accelerating. We may be aware of it with our intellectual mind, but it's possible we can also sense it with our heart. The heart is an extremely powerful electromagnetic transmitter and receptor. This has recently been discovered. It's connected to the electromagnetic field of the earth. And maybe it's connected to the electromagnetic field that is collectively created by all life forms. You may have your own way of understanding this connection, of sensing it. But it seems it is definitely there. And perhaps we're moving towards a greater awareness of this connection as more and more people realize the story of separation that we have been trapped in is no longer working. So just we'll take a minute or so in silence just to try and tune in to that connection with everyone in the group, with everyone else who's in this inquiry, this striving to find a deep response to the situation, with all other humans, with all other life forms, with our planet as a whole, this living planet that we are part of. Thank you very much. A moment to come back from that. So we're going to take another 5-minute break, and then we'll hear part 3. Thanks very much, everyone. See you in at 5 past for? Thanks.
Seminar is the new civilization. I came into my awareness of the climate crisis in 2006, and it was a review of James Lovelock's book, The Revenge of Gaia, and the review was in the New Scientist. And having read the review, and I mentioned earlier, sort of thinking, oh gosh, you know, I've really got to take this seriously. I then read the book, and perhaps one or two of you have also read the book. And towards the end, he actually projects into the future, like the end of the 21st century. And he envisages that the climate has risen, and that, you know, some of the disasters that we talked about in the collapse, the first part of this, had happened, but that there was a group of humans making their way northwards. I think it was from Africa, but anyway, that's not the point. The point is that they were discussing between them, and they were sort of carriers of various positive things which they wanted to take into the future towards a new civilization. And his point was that we need to understand what we don't want to take into the future. In other words, what is harmful in the current civilization. And then we need to hold on to the things which are good from the traditions and from the current civilization, and take those with us into the future, and perhaps develop from them. And then more recently, I came across some talks on the internet by Dr. Rupert Reed, who is connected with the Green Party and also Extinction Rebellion. And he talks about three scenarios for the future. The first is that we manage to transform this civilization and save ourselves through this transformation. And he says that he feels this is actually very unlikely. It's not impossible, but he does feel it's unlikely. His second scenario is that sort of from within the collapse of this civilization, we construct a new civilization. And his third scenario is total extinction. And all of these are possible. But he kind of feels that we need to put our emphasis on the middle one. And I found this quite optimistic. I found this encouraging, because otherwise you look at the collapse, as I pushed you to do, and you know, I didn't tell you anything you didn't know already, but in the first talk, it was pretty heavy, and consciously so. And some of the comments that came back proved that you felt that. And actually, because I think we all need to feel that, but at the same time, we need to know what we're going to do and what we want. So when it comes to thinking about a new civilization, then we need to think about what we want to let go of, which has been harmful. And for that, it does help to come to question, well, what is the root problem? And of course, there are different ways of presenting what the root problem is. You know, I'm from the Buddhist tradition, so we have many ways of talking about what the root problem is, but I don't want to talk about that now. I watched an interview the other day with a remarkable 11-year-old girl called Elsie Luna, who actually quit Extinction Rebellion because she thinks that they've got too narrow a vision. And she thinks that the root problem is oppression. And she thinks for herself, if you can watch it, she's interviewed by Jem Bendell on his YouTube channel. She's an amazing young girl, actually. But oppression in many forms, she thinks, is behind the climate crisis. And actually, that's quite valid. In my own case, I look at the what are the roots of the kinds of oppression that we see in the world today, and I put patriarchy pretty high on the list. I'll be honest. I think that patriarchy has got a lot to answer for. Historically, we don't quite know when it arose, but it's unnatural, and I think we need to start by recognizing that there is absolutely no valid reason for male supremacy, except that it's been used to serve the interests of certain groups, it's not even good for males. And that we've all absorbed the norms of patriarchy. And when I say all, I mean women as well. So we've had quite a bit of talk about internal change being the beginning of external change. And I think it's quite important. Yeah, I will put the 11-year-old's name on chat when I stop this talk. Her name is Elsie, E-L-S-I-E, Luna, L-U-N-E. Oh, thank you, David's done it. Okay, so let's carry on. Yeah, where was I? Inner patriarch. Yeah, the inner patriarch is something that we all have to deal with, men and women, and it's for the good of for all of us. And we've all got a feminine and masculine side, and we need to find inner harmony between these two aspects of ourselves. And that is a challenge for many of us, but it's a journey well worth taking. It seems that there's quite a strong theory that patriarchy started to arise around the time of the agricultural revolution, which is 10 to 12,000 years ago, although some people say it was more recent. But what we can see is that following on from that is empire, colonialism, racism, slavery, and destruction of the environment. And I'm not saying that that means that men are to blame for everything, but what I mean is that oppressive structures are to blame, in the sense that this puts us in disharmony with nature. So in terms of generating a new civilization, to me, those kinds of things that I mentioned are what we have to leave behind. And that means that we need to give room for, very much like in David's last meditation, for the human heart to connect and evolve cultures which are natural to the human heart, and in which everybody's included. This is one of the, what you call it, principles and values of Extinction Rebellion, that everybody is included and every part of everybody is included. And I think that the new civilization needs to have that as one of its founding principles. But anyway, this isn't about prescribing what should be in the new civilization. It's more about finding processes whereby it can evolve naturally. I believe those processes are already underway. It's been said in this forum already that we're at a turning point. David emphasized that in the meditation, and he and I have talked about that, and we both feel that to be the case. But actually, I'm reading it more and more in the news. I'm reading it in all kinds of things. I mentioned I was in a webinar yesterday about racism. There were 3 Black people speaking, and each of them, no, 2 of them particularly, said, we're at a turning point. This is different. This is not like in the past. And I was involved in the anti-racist movement back in the 70s. And this is qualitatively different. It feels like, in general, the population as a whole is coming to terms with the fact that racism just is a disease that we have to be rid of. Now, the Me Too movement was also very powerful. I don't think it's gone far enough yet, but there's a process underway there too, which is to bring about a balance, a gender equality. That process has been going on all my life. But, you know, again, that is something which is continually evolving. So the new civilization needs to have these kind of principles of equality and diversity and inclusivity. And I've already mentioned that I think the economy needs to be driven by well-being, not growth. And that we'll almost certainly have to change certain practices in the way we produce things, the way we get to places, and so many other things, including the way we make decisions collectively about how we're going to construct our society. But humans are capable of doing all that. And the only other thing I just wanted to say is there are quite a lot of apocalyptic visions from many traditional faiths, actually. And most of them involve a Messiah appearing, and that Messiah is invariably male. And you can leave it all up to him, and then everything will be all right. And so all this talk about collapse and adaptation and new civilization, I want us to be quite careful not to fall for messianic solutions. because I think that they lead to a kind of extremism, actually. The strong man who comes along and solves it and sorts it all out, the Superman, and so forth. So we need to do this collectively, and we need to work together. And as I said, that's already happening. It's, yeah, how to deal with the vested interests, Clive has put in the chat. Okay, well, that is a big question, but you know, we will sort that out as we go along, is my answer to that. And I think people already are. There's all kinds of things that have happened even recently, like going back to school, for instance. The vested interests wanted everybody to go back to school much quicker, but the parents and the teachers said, actually, that's not very good for the future of our kids and also the teaching staff, and we're just not going to do it. And so it didn't happen, not the way that the government wanted anyway. And so I think that that's how vested interests are dealt with, just by the collective consciousness and saying, no, that's not the way we want to go. But okay, that's the end of my talk on this topic. And I can now tell you, because it's my role, to introduce the next exercise. The next exercise, you'll be in somewhat larger groups, and I'll leave David to work out the numbers, but we're probably talking about groups of not less than 5 or 6. So anyway, I can't work out the numbers, but I'll leave that to David. And the exercise is called Future Communities. And there are 3 questions. Will you be able to put those in the chat, David? After I'll just read them out. The 3 questions for you to discuss in your group. So you can all pitch in and share your views. The first, they're about future communities. In other words, sustainable communities that will emerge gradually. The first question is, how will you ensure food supply? There's a little etc. on that, so that would include other essentials like housing and health service, education. But food supply is the main one to discuss. You haven't got time to do everything. The second question is, how will you create and maintain harmony? Okay. Now, just to bear in mind, harmony can include conflict, but that conflict must gradually be resolved. If conflict is resolved, then harmony is restored. So disharmony comes when conflict is not resolved. So how will you create and maintain harmony? And the third question is, how will you interact with other communities? So imagine being part of a community of a certain number. Maybe some people have suggested that we're biologically good at working with about 150 individuals. So you might be living in a city, or you might be living in a village, or you might be living in a town, or you might be living in the countryside. But let's say that you're part of a community of about 150 people. How will you ensure food supply? How will you create and maintain harmony within your community? And how will you interact with other communities? Okay, that's the exercise. And now David will put us into groups, and then we will discuss that.
Okay, so we'll have just over 10 minutes to talk about those 3 questions, and I'm opening the rooms now.
You know, who didn't have it, and hopefully receive something back. We didn't actually talk about trading particularly, it was more about sharing. So I guess it relies on everybody to take responsibility of sharing what they've got with people who haven't got it. And obviously that's a 2-way thing, you'd hope to get something back. Also there's some talk about foraging for wild food and the need for education, so people would know what wild food was good to eat and where they could get vital nutrients like vitamin C and such like. So education is very important in the whole food side of things. And I think we finished off with just saying each person should do what they can to contribute to that and take responsibility for the food chain. On point 2, how would you create and maintain harmony? What should we say? So there was some discussion about whether we need a leader or not. And I think there was some view that this is much better done collectively. But at the same time, it may need a leader, but if there were to be a leader, the important thing was that they should not be allowed to maintain their office, as it were, for more than a year, so that there would be some democratic. So there's a thing here between democratic choosing a leader, or whether you have everyone just talking together, which I think is what Andy would prefer. I'm just not sure it would work practically, but obviously the more people involved in the leadership, the better. We don't want any dictators. And on the third point, how will you interact with other communities? Well, actually, we didn't really address that, actually. I think we were talking about, well, we have addressed it in sharing with other communities, the food chain and so on. We wonder what to do with people who don't conform. And Andy particularly, and I think others in the group, are very much for having a culture of working through conflict and talking and listening to share, to work out problems. Actually, this is more harmony, isn't it? This is really more question 2. Yes, so talking and listening. I feel that is a wonderful idea. I'm just not sure it's practical. Sorry.
So thanks, Helen. I think time's up, and that was a good report. I was in that group, so I know that represents more or less what we discussed. So who would like to go next? Show of hand.
Yeah, can I nominate Betsy Downing for our group?
Well, if Betsy's willing to go next, are you?
But Betsy's already nominated for our group, but Kate has put her hand up. So we'll have Kate and then Betsy.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, am I on? No, go ahead, Kate.
Yeah, I'll do our group first. Betsy, I'm not sure what number we were. We did things in a different order. We started off talking about the first question about food supplies. We touched on different things like local food production. Somebody mentioned rationing. We said there could be a culture of valuing the people who are producing the food, and that in a small community, most people could be involved in the process. So everyone had knowledge and investment in it. We'd build up resilience in the food chain. We would eat more seasonal food, and as we built up the resilience, we become more healthy, more balanced, and I can't remember where that went, but it was all part of a better way of producing food. And also we talked about storing food, restoring old techniques of growing and saving seeds, and storing foods that were out of season, so learning from the past. And then that moved us on to the third question about how we would share that. So we talked about how certain areas would only be able to produce certain foods. So we talked about having hubs, as they used to do in the old days, sort of having a market town and different people sharing in those hubs. And we thought that those hubs would be kind of regional and good for sharing skills and sharing food, and finding out the strengths of each area. So medicines or any sort of skills could be shared across different regions, and that would keep harmony in the region. And then sharing ideas and ways of organising. We were talking a bit about the way that it's done in Extinction Rebellion with citizens' assemblies, consent-based community democracy, and having working groups that went across different geographical areas to share that sort of collective knowledge and working practices. And then we went on to the second one about harmony, and we said that this could come from building the community very much on a Hart foundation, making sure that we dealt skillfully with the sense of community by building in celebration, dealing with grief, building in rituals that everybody bought into, so creating a real sense of community, and looking at the breakdown of community with things like training in nonviolent communication, healing circles, conflict resolution, with a compassionate approach. So that, and we thought that in a small community, the visibility of a person who was not you know, who wasn't being harmonious with everybody else. In a truly connected community, that would happen less anyway, but it would be much more visible, and also the reasons for it, the reasons behind it would be more visible. So as a community, we would take collective responsibility for the reasons why it was happening, rather than just blame the person for where they were at, their behavior or whatever. So that was a kind of collective responsibility, and that would depend on a lot of mutual sharing and learning, which we believe would go on throughout life. And also at the end, I've just got some random points. Removing fear. If people are acting from fight or flight, that doesn't help. So removing fear. The transition to this is the most difficult time in this stage, because people are used to working in a very different way. And if we don't do this transition carefully, it could go in a very different way, where people become more closed in, more fear, more reactivity. Moving from I to we, leading by example, and being calm in a storm. That's where we ended.
Wow, that's quite a vision. Great, thank you very much. that leaves one group, and is it Betsy that's going to report back from the third group? Okay, over to you, Betsy.
Okay, thank you. We talked about how important regenerative agriculture is to sequester carbon, and we talked about how important that is on all levels: victory gardens, farmers, community gardens. We talked about there's 40 to 50% waste of food around the world, and decreasing waste would be enormous. We also talked about how important the water cycle is in regenerative agriculture. And then also some of the other things, how important healthcare will be, and homeless, and turning old vacant strip malls into facilities for the community that are serving the community. And then also for conflict resolution, or for the harmony, we talked about the importance of conflict resolution, and not that there won't be conflict, there will be conflict, but we all need to be schooled and skilled in how to talk in a way that deals with conflict successfully. And let's see what else we talked about. And we talked about, for interacting with others and other communities and so forth, that we'd have there'd be annual fairs or festivals to share, people to come together and share food and connect with skills and share skills and that kind of thing. Okay, that's for me. Anybody else want to? Okay.
Right. So thank you very much, and thank you to everybody for what has been, in the end, a very constructive gathering and conversation between everybody. And if you think about it, on the basis of our discussion, you can feel that we humans collectively, not just those in this group, but in general, have got the potential, the resource, the inner intelligence, I guess it is, the wisdom, the compassion, to actually create a new civilization. Timescale is something, a big question, we don't know. The kind of obstacles that we face along the way, we have talked about some of them, and we don't know how it will actually unfold. But as was pointed out, in most cases, it'll be beyond our lifetime that the big changes really happen. But we are part of a living lineage of creating a future which is worth living for everybody. So thank you very much for this exercise, and I'm going to hand over now to Rowena, who is going to lead us through a final meditation.
You need to unmute yourself.
Is that okay? Can people hear me? Yeah. Okay. So let's just take a moment to settle together and reflect as we draw this wonderful time we've spent together to a close. So just find a comfortable position and Allow yourself to just focus on your breath. Allow yourself to relax and breathe deeply. And now bring to mind the vision you've just created for a new civilization. Make it feel real to you. Feel the energy of it. And feel the difference it makes to the way we live in the world. Try to really inhabit your vision. Think of the community that you are part of. Think of the environment that around you and how you interact with it. And think of the things that you treasure most about this way of being in the world. This is your positive vision for the future. Allow yourself to fully align with this vision. And just take a moment now to inwardly commit to direct your energies towards bringing this kind of future into being. And in your own time, return to the present moment and to this beautiful midsummer's day in 2020. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you very much, Rowena. Thank you, everyone. So, as we said, it's been an experiment. And not everything worked quite as we'd hoped, but I hope it has been valuable. I've certainly found it valuable and illuminating. So thank you so much for all of your participation. And we do want to hear, from you any thoughts and ideas, and obviously, if you are able, if it suits you, if you're not already too busy, it would be great to have your future involvement in the Ekodama project. We've got lots of plans. We have a tree planting project. We've been offered the opportunity to sponsor planting of 5,000 trees near Leeds. And those trees will be dedicated for the long life of His Holiness the Dalai Lama, those of you who are Buddhists, and Lama Zopa Rinpoche, those of you who are in FPMT. So please go to our website and look at that if you are interested in that. I have been giving a series of teachings on Ekodama. I think the last one is going to be on a Wednesday, and that's on the website, but it will resume in September. And we have monthly discussion meetings as well on different topics. But I want to just say a big thank you to Andy Wistreich for coming and kind of leading us on this, and we hope that we will continue to have more exploration of these issues with him and others. Yeah, I'm gonna just unmute everybody and give you a chance to say farewell, and anything else you want to finally add. Go ahead.
Just to say thank you very much, David and Rowena and Andy. It's been really good. So thank you all very much. Yeah, thank you.
Everyone, it's been good.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Yeah, it's lovely to meet new people. I didn't get to be in a group with everybody, but those I did, it was lovely to meet you, and hope to see everybody else on other occasions. And thank you so much. It's lovely.
I appreciate everybody's input.
Thanks very much. Somebody asked for the website address, so I've put their website and our email address, so those come to Rowena and myself, and the Facebook page as well. Just put them into the chat again. Okay.
Thank you all. Hope to see you again in these rooms.
Thanks very much, Monica.
Bye.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much for participating, everyone, all your contributions.
Thank you
so much.
Thanks very much again.
Thank you.
Thanks, Colin. Thanks for coming.
Yeah, thank you.
Bye.
Bye.